Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the Fully Mindful podcast, your gateway to mindfulness, self discovery, and purpose. I'm your host, Melissa Chareau, and today we're honored to have a truly inspiring guest, JJ DiGeronimo, president of Tech Savvy Women and the author of three insightful books, which we are most definitely going to get into. Her latest work, Seeking 74 Key Findings to Raise Your Energy, Sidestep Your Self-Doubts, and align with your life's work, is a beacon for those of us asking, hey, what's this all for? What are we doing? Where are we really going? In this transformative book, which I highly recommend you go out and get and read, she shares her personal journey, which is compelling, unpacking strategies that infused purpose into her work and life. What's wonderful about this book, and we'll get into this, is these are short chapters, compelling stories, thought-provoking questions, and it really creates a space of self-discovery. So if you've ever pondered now what, or is there more, you're going to love this podcast today because we're going to get into that, and you're going to love her book. So yeah, she's here to discuss her insights on purpose, success, and the art of aligning with your life's work. So get ready for this hopefully very meaningful conversation that might just spark your next step of self-discovery. With that, welcome, JJ. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Melissa. I'm thrilled, especially I think it perfectly coincides with the work that you do.
Thank you. Well, let's hope. I think it does. I think we're very aligned. And I think the universe, there was no accident that we got connected and we're doing this interview here today. So with that, so people can get a little bit of a sense of your story, which I find so compelling. Can you give us a little bit of background of where you came from and how you got to the point that you are working with other women, really successful women, your life's purpose has really shifted, and you are very much looking, it seems to me, to help people align their life and their work with their purpose. And so how did you get to be where you are today and writing this most recent book, Seeking?
Well, I would say it's been quite a journey. I just turned 50, so this is not for the faint heart. I spent over 20 years in the tech industry, most of which in Silicon Valley. I have a computer information systems degree, and I spent a lot of time with data centers. And, I'm a mom with two kids, and I live in the suburbs, and I'm juggling all the things that most people listening are juggling. But I just thought it was kind of bullshit, honestly, with women and all that kind of comes with having it all. Like, I really thought that was completely possible. Coming up, I didn't have my kids until my mid 30s. And once I had my kids, you hear those stories like, oh, my kids just slept through the night after 2 weeks and, they're never sick and this and that. And I would say that, I had a really big job and I had super young kids and my wheels were falling off on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And so I had no intentions to write a book. I'm dyslexic. I'm an engineering mind, but I started pulling women together at tables to talk about like how do you keep this all going in the right direction?
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's an important topic. So many of us, particularly women, I mean, men feel this way too, but so many women feel like we have to be able to do it all, right? We have to be, if we have kids, we have to be the great and totally involved mother. We have big careers. We want to be as successful as we can be with that. And then we're also supposed to somehow, if we have a partner, be mindful and engaged with that partner while also somehow managing to take care of ourselves, both physically, emotionally, and spiritually, and trying to pull all that off at the same time. The understatement of the year is a challenge, right? So that's where you were coming from, is trying to do all of that.
Yeah. And I really just started getting women together. I mean, I tried book
Mhm.
clubs, I tried all kinds of things, but eventually I just had to create my own group of women, which started with just a handful of women, just getting together, not even talking about work, but just talking about all the tricks of the trade of how to keep everything going. And then that catapulted me into starting that for my company
Mhm.
out of Silicon Valley, is really running the Women in Tech group, which then, I learned so much about women outside of just wanting to juggle and balance and keep everything going, right? They wanted to get promoted, they wanted to get on boards, they wanted to find a sponsor. And so I just wrote down every question that women in business had. And I spent 3 years researching that while I had my day job. And that was really the basis for my second book because, I didn't know there was a difference of working in your career and on your career, which most of us don't know until after the age of 35 when they try to go for really kind of strategic positions.
Right.
And it doesn't work out. And then you start to kind of be like, well, why? And you realize like people have strategic relationships. They're getting these head nods. They're getting aligned to special projects or get specific P&L. So I really started to dissect like how do you get to that executive level or that board position in my second book, which took me on an entire different journey of talking to women about accelerating their career, which was also very rewarding. But in parallel to that, I was having my own kind of life, midlife, like, what the heck is going on? Is this really what I'm supposed to be doing? And why does all this matter?
Mhm.
And, at the same time, I had things happening in my house and with my family and just things were kind of falling apart in different areas of my life. And I just felt kind of unfulfilled, even though everything on paper said I should be fulfilled.
Right. And therein lies the issue, right? So many of us get to that point where everything, like you said, on paper looks like, oh, I should feel completely fulfilled. And then, I don't know if you felt this way, but I certainly have, feel guilty that I don't feel fulfilled. I should feel fulfilled. I should feel 100% grateful for everything that I've created in my life, and I don't.
Yeah. Yeah, and yes, completely. And then I don't know, for me, I had key relationships, things start happening in those relationships, people I thought I could depend on that was a little wobbly and in some cases was like breaking in half. And I realized that I really aligned my happiness to a lot of things outside of me.
Mm. Mhm. Isn't that what so many of us do when we stop to take a look, right? It's what is happening on the outside and what makes others happy and what should make us happy but isn't necessarily what makes us happy, right? Yeah. So you started this has been a long journey, right? And you've done, we talked about your first two books very briefly there. And then you get to this point where you're writing this. I mean, I don't know. I'm looking at this book, Seeking, and to me, it's yes, it's very practical in terms of what kinds of questions to ask and what to do, but it's actually a very, I'm going to go so far as to say, as practical as it is, it's also a very spiritual book, is the way that I'm looking at it. Would you agree with that?
I would. It's really a bridge, I think, for women that maybe have dabbled in some things or may have gone to some classes, but really are trying to find their North Star.
Mhm.
And I think for many of us, we're almost conditioned not to talk about the masculine and the feminine and working from the inside out. And when I tried to get this book published, it's funny because so many publishers said to me, well, you write for women in business, but this is spiritual.
Mm.
Or could be a spiritual book, but there's too much business in it. And so many publishers would not pick the book up because they didn't know where to put it. But for me, it's the journey I've been going through as a businesswoman, trying to align to something bigger than myself that I couldn't initially probably find in my later years of working. And the journey is one that I wish I could have found in a book while I was going through it because I was lost in my own choices.
Mhm. Yeah, and I mean, it reminds me, I'm reading another book right now that is, I think it's been around for a little bit, called Reboot. It's by coach Jerry Colonna. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's very much, and he's, I forget what they've called him, like the Zen guru of Silicon Valley or something like that. Uh, but I think you're very aligned in that he's asking the same sort of questions. And I think a lot of business people, and maybe even some of the women you've worked with, were like, wait, why are we? I thought I just wanted to find out how to be more successful, how to get a promotion, how to balance all these things. But you're asking these deeper questions of like, what is making me tick? Why do I believe this? Where do I want to be? How do I want to be? Right? Which are the fundamental questions. Like we can forget about the how do I get the promotion? How do I balance my life? I mean, those are wonderful questions, but it's really this deeper question that of course it seems to me obvious that any businesswoman or any woman or any person would really want to ask.
Yeah. And there were questions I was asking myself. Like when my
Mhm.
editor was like, where did you come up with all these questions? I think I have like 200 questions in the book. And I'm like,
Yeah.
well, they're all the questions that I had to work through.
Yeah.
She's like, you worked through all these questions. I'm like, yeah, and some I'm still working through, but I needed to understand my relationship with money.
Hmm.
Money is a big deal for a lot of people and it drives a lot of their decisions. And so I have 3 chapters on how do you determine your relationship with money and does your current relationship support where you are taking your life and career?
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that because I know that is a huge issue for so many people, right? You might want to take your career or your life in a different direction, but money, right? So tell us a little bit more about where you go in the book and where you've been personally with the issue of money and your relationship with money to the extent you feel comfortable about it, but why it's so important to explore this relationship.
Oh my gosh. I guess I didn't realize how many decisions I made because of money. I grew up with little money. And
Mhm.
then when I was in tech, I made a ton of money and then I lost it all. Not literally like, but literally with stock, I was a
Mhm.
multimillionaire and I didn't sell it when I was told to. And because I was like, oh, well, I'll just keep it. I mean, what am I? And then I lost it all and then I had to rebuild again. So I feel like I've been up and down the money hill many times. But I didn't learn until my mid or I guess early 40s, like that I was living more in scarcity than abundance.
Mhm.
And I've read several books and worked on many different courses around money to really figure out how to live more in abundance because money, in a lot of ways, is a frequency, and what you throw your money at is sort of what you care about. And so it's just really deep learning about who you really are and how your childhood and things that happen in your life really are projecting energies into your decisions and the direction of where you're going. And like I had to really unravel so many stories, things that happened, outside of money, just like what happened in second grade, because I told you I was dyslexic. So I had a lot of negative conversations with teachers in second grade, not recognizing I had this learning disability and how that impacted my decisions as an adult. And so many women have relationships with sisters and mothers and loved ones. I've run so many women's panels over the last 3 decades, and I can't tell you how many people refer to different family members and how that's driven them to where they are today. And all of those layers have information in it for you to determine whether or not you want to continue to use that information or to let it go. Because what I found through this journey is like you are a collage or tapestry of everything you've gone through. And sometimes you've got to let some of that go so that you have the momentum to leap in the direction you desire.
I want to go off on a little bit of a tangent here, but I want to connect with you on the dyslexia because I think it's really important. So many of us have, and I was talking with a friend about this last night. I'm neurodivergent, and she's like, "But are you? Are you like, how are we really calling it divergent when it's actually very common for people to have different ways of thinking, of learning, of being?" And but yet there's this certain expectation culturally still to this day that we operate in the same sort of linear way with the same abilities, and there's this expectation. And so for those of us who have different styles of learning or thinking, it can really, as you say, paint the story for how we end up later in life. So, how are you, if you would be interested in getting into this, like dyslexia is a big deal. It is not, um, I mean, you really have to have special supports for that at times, at least when you're younger, and you didn't have that. I have ADHD, and I did not have the supports. We're both around the same age. I think they just didn't exist. Or if they did, they were very minimally available, or the way that they were available was really different. For instance, I was told, oh, sure, you can have supports. You just get to be in a special class with all the other people who are different, seemingly different from, everybody in the mainstream. And I did not end up going that route. And the story that I learned was don't ask for help because you'll be alienated and you'll be sort of put aside. And then there's something wrong or bad with me for having this different way of being. And that really did impact for so many years how I was as a professional, how I was in my relationship with my husband, how I was in relationship with other people. So I'm wondering how the dyslexia impacted you and how you were able to, if it impacted you, and if it did, how are you able to move beyond that and become this incredibly successful person, both in tech and then later as your own entrepreneurial, authorial self? I mean, you wrote
Yes,
books.
yes. Yeah, great question. Well, first of all, I had no idea until my daughter was tested. So I just learned recently, but I knew. I mean, I am horrible at editing my own papers. My brain moves faster than I can write, and I skip over words and I don't use the right tense. So I would tell you that I got consistently got D's on my papers because of my proofreading ability. And I almost got kicked out of my computer science program, but I had a teacher pull me aside and say, listen, you're a great writer, but you just can't edit. So you got to get your papers done 2 to 3 days before, bring it up to the editing service, have them edit it for you, fix it, and then submit it. So I had
Mm,
guides along the way that definitely helped me kind of figure out how to work around it. But when I never thought I would ever write books. And it's just funny how the universe puts people in your path along the
mhm,
way. And if you're paying attention, you're just sometimes just so amazed. I mean, I was only writing the stories down for my first book for my daughter, who at the time was only 3. And I was just writing them down so that she could have them. But then I was talking about them and started sharing them with some women. And they're like, you really should put this in a book. And I'm like, yeah, I can't write. My teachers told me I can't write. There's no way I can do a book. And then my one friend's like, well, I have an editor friend. Maybe they could take a look at it. And then that just completely snowballed. And I still have the same issues, but I hire the people that can help me edit.
right. So
So,
instead of falling into the story of and just staying in the story, which is
right.
my teachers told me I can't do this, you were open to hearing other opportunities for someone to help you. Because isn't that the truth that we all have our strengths, we all have something to offer, and we all have, our different abilities or weaknesses in some case. And yet if we put ourselves out there, if we're willing to put ourselves out there, and that takes courage to put ourselves out there. Let's see what happens with this editor. Let's see what they say. And you were willing to do that. And because you were willing to take that step, look at what happened. Amazing.
It's amazing how many women I see have their life's work in an area that for some reason they're locked down early in life. So
Mm,
like I do a podcast for spiritual leaders and energy practitioners, and so many of them were locked into incredibly religious families. And they
mm.
had to break through that story. And like I had to break through the writing to be an author. So I think sometimes we position ourselves in situations that we have to break through to do our real life's work. And I think that's what the book seeking really does for a lot of people is it helps them figure out what they have to break through to lean into their life's work.
Yes, and that's a huge deal because so many of us have something to break through. And what I love about this work, and I'm imagining in your other work, you often use this expression working off the side of your desk, right? And I love that expression because at least the way that I'm interpreting it is we can still do all the things. We don't have to stop everything that we're doing in order to lean in and explore further, whether that's we're exploring other opportunities, other careers, or just looking at ourselves more. We can do this while still um, remaining in our current positions, right? Am I getting that right?
Yes. And in fact, the book, if you see the title and the cover, it's off the side of the computer, right? It's like, what am I
Mhm.
into off the side of my desk? So, if you're listening and you're like, well, I don't know what my life's work is, I'm not really sure. Like, what is calling you? Is there a class? Is there a retreat? Is there, a phone call you should make or a group you want to become part of? A lot of us sit on the side of the pool thinking about when I have more time, when I have more money,
Mm.
when
Mhm.
I get to this level in my career, then I can XYZ. And I really encourage the reader to like, what can you do today? What can you do this week? And it could be just researching people that are already down the path you want to walk down. And I think for so many of us, we're waiting for everything to align. And I can assure you that that's never going to happen. You're never going to get everything to align. And so I encourage you to lean into what is calling you in a way that you can do today.
I love that. And you talk in the book, or you share a story in the book about taking your first solo trip, I think to, it was Sedona, if I'm not mistaken. And I think you had this interaction with your boss that was, probably really challenging because I think it was a he was sort of challenging you, like, you're really going to do this? Like, what's going on? Why are you doing this? Right?
Yeah, yeah. And it was like the guilt associated with using our family money, even though I had a great
Mhm.
salary, the guilt of leaving my young kids, the guilt of taking time off of work just so I could go to Sedona, because I had this inner turmoil that would not quit. Like I was moving down my career exactly like as expected, where I thought I was going to go. And I was like, I still want to go this way, but I've got this inner turmoil that's really
Mhm.
like loud and it's telling me like, this is not your path. This is not your path. And I'm like, yes, it is. So I had this internal fight going on. So I thought I found a retreat in Sedona called the Soul Adventure. And I'm like, I got to go and just see what the heck is going on. How could I not be on my path? I'm on my path. But then
Right.
just asking for permission to go because it was a couple $1,000s because they do such intense work. And I was like, oh, who is going to approve that? My husband's going to think I'm crazy. My boss isn't going to give me time off. And it was just such a huge test for me to prioritize myself. Looking back, that's what the whole thing was.
Mhm.
Uh, and I probably would have eventually gotten down this path, but I feel like for me, that was really a marker in the sand saying, like, I'm going to take this time to do what is calling me, even if I have guilt, even if I feel bad about leaving people at home, and even if I have to take the time off.
Right. And I would just note for the listeners, like, you're not saying drop everything, quit your job and figure it out, because that's not really necessarily the solution either. But it might take that inner listening, that willingness to listen to those voices that might be in conflict, and do something that you can check out. And that took a lot of courage to just go take a couple day trip to Sedona, to follow that whisper, right? To say, like, oh, okay, this is what is calling me. I don't know why, but I'm going to check it out. And this is the big one for most of us, I value myself enough in order to do this, to take the steps, to ask the husband, with our money and my job and all the things, and the sort of risking that people are going to think I'm crazy for wanting to do this, but I want to do it, and this feels right. And so yeah, that takes incredible courage. It's no small feat. So I don't think either of us are suggesting to any of the listeners here that, like, oh, it just, you just make a decision and you go. That would be great. And if you can, wonderful. But if it feels uncomfortable, lean in, right? Yeah.
Completely. I completely. And I just want to reassure you that every step of the way I doubted myself, every step I've doubted. And I even doubt myself on a daily basis. I call myself crazy. What are you thinking? Who's going to take you seriously? And I don't know if you've experienced this, Melissa, but when you eventually, it was 8 years from the time I pulled the women's group together to the time I left my job. So I was doing it off the side of my desk for 8 years. And it wasn't until I got my revenue streams organized that I knew where I was going to have revenue coming in. That's when I felt comfortable enough to leave my job. And that took me 8 years. So I've been doing off the side of my desk activities for a long time. But when I did jump over to my own thing, it was probably one of the biggest life lessons outside of getting married and having kids, I think, because I didn't know how to define myself. I defined myself so much by my title, my degree, my
Hmm.
career, my salary, the people I got to meet with, the places I got to go. And when all of that went away because I chose to go off on my own, I really hit a low point because I didn't believe enough in myself and the work that I was going to do because I didn't see that many people doing it. And I don't know if that's how you felt when you left your job and went on your own, but I just want you to know like it's a constant evolution of our self-esteem and self-worth. And I talk a lot about this because we want you leaning into what is calling you, but let me assure you that you need to have a support group and you need to like really write down. You just have to have a way of really continuing to support yourself because it's hard to lean into what is calling you sometimes.
Right. And there is a way to do it, as you've suggested, with, off the side of your desk. So there is a way to satisfy those pulls while you're figuring it out. Right. And it could be not everybody's going to leave their job, not everybody is going to become an entrepreneur, not everybody is going to go on their own. It could be something else entirely. And it's just so important to explore that. Those whispers, well, for me, they sometimes feel like shouts, but they're often whispers. It's just important to honor ourselves and check them out. And it may be, I have a friend who just says, "You're just getting information, Melissa. You're just getting information. You're gathering intelligence. Nobody has to make a decision," because I will get all spun up. But and what if and then what if, and it's like, you're just gathering intelligence. Once you have all the information, see whatever it is that is interesting is about, how that lands with me. We're like a million steps before we make a decision. We're just gathering information and experiences and allowing ourselves to experience something that is calling to us for whatever reason, right?
That is a beautiful statement. And I've been, I very similar to you want to have it all figured out, but I have learned in the journey is do not worry about the how. Do not worry about the how. Do yourself a favor and lean into what is calling you one step at a time without a master plan.
And I think that's really hard, especially for successful people, right? We're used to having a master plan. We went to college, we got maybe a degree past that. We've worked really hard in our careers, we've gotten promotions, we've been very intentional about where we're going to be, and we feel like we've had this trajectory. So it can feel very destabilizing when we don't have that same trajectory, when we don't have the master plan, the flow chart, the spreadsheet, the process map, because we're used to having those things, and that gives us a lot of comfort. So it can feel, I have a coach that I've worked with, one of the teachers at a coaching program that I went through. He says, get discomfortable. Right?
Huh.
So it's
Yeah.
getting comfortable being uncomfortable. And he just says shorthand, discomfortable. And I love that. It's like, it's okay to get a little discomfortable, right? And undoubtedly that's what that's going to be.
It is. And I will tell you, just to kind of add on to that, like if I were to put the how plan together, I would have never assumed I would be sitting here right now with three
Mm.
books. Like, and now I'm working on like a global wellness center and I'm working on a publishing company to get more people published. Like it's so much bigger than I could have ever imagined for myself. But it started way back, probably way back, in my high school years and then throughout my life. But really the hyper focus was in 2008 of just pulling that first women's group together because I was looking for something I couldn't find. And so I created it on my own. And it took me 2 years from the time I got the idea to the time I did it. And I was scared to death that first night that those women came. Like, what if they come and they don't think it's worth it? What if they don't like the food? What if they're not happy with the other guests? And, every step of the way, I really talk about in the book of different emotions I've had to work through that are totally normal to your point. Um, but just do what's calling you now. Just what can you actually get done now? What can you get done, in the next 30 days? Because that will uncover your next step and your next step. And if you're trying to build this huge master plan, I guarantee you're never going to get anywhere fast because you're going to be so busy getting every detail right. And I promise you, the universe has a bigger plan for you.
And I love what you said that you would have, I'm paraphrasing here, but you kind of would have sold yourself short had you figured out and followed the master plan. So many opportunities might have been missed because if we get really focused on, no, we've got to do step A, B, C, and D, we miss, you know, X, Y, Z potentially because we get laser focused, which is wonderful. We're wonderful at getting shit done. But if we take that approach, we're missing all these potential opportunities that could have landed us somewhere even better. And that's what I
Mm.
hear you saying is being a little bit nimble, being open to continuing to hear those whispers or those callings and not having it all figured out. I mean, not just flying blindly, of course, but not being open to other possibilities along the way. Yeah.
Mm. Yes, yes. And don't be surprised. Like, I think the other thing that comes forward too is don't be surprised if the people you've chosen to be around you might be your biggest hurdles. Because I
Mm,
talk to so many people that are like, well, I have this spouse or this significant other, and they keep questioning me. They keep questioning me on what am I doing? Am I making money? Is this worth it? And I will say I do all kinds of spiritual work really to help align my energy and to really sit in my gifts. And for me, I need to have that dedicated time to work with different practitioners. And Byron Katie is
mhm,
a person I've worked with that talks a lot about what's happening inside of you is reflecting outside of you. So if you have people around you that are constantly questioning you, it's actually you really questioning yourself. And so
mm.
not to get bogged down by other people's self-doubt, just continue to say, yes, I can. Let me see. Don't worry about the next step. What can I do today? Just like really action based, let's get moving steps.
Yeah, I love that because so often I think we've all had that experience. And it could be that our loved ones or those around us who do question us are doing it from a space of love. They're not necessarily questioning us because they doubt us, although that happens too. Often it's just like a curiosity or, well, oh, that's interesting. Like, what's that about? Why are you doing that? I thought you said you wanted to do this. I thought you wanted to work with, to be in tech this whole time. And now wait, you want to do something else. What's that about? So sometimes it is doubt, but a lot of times it's just curiosity, right? And wanting to understand and an opportunity to connect with us. It isn't necessarily, and I love what you said about what Byron Katie's saying. It's we're really projecting our own questioning on these people, that this is our perception of what it is, the reason why they're questioning us, not necessarily why they're questioning us. Yeah. So and you talk about that, this idea of energy. And one of my favorite parts in the book, in Seeking, is about, it's titled Chapter 39, Recognizing the Source of Your Energy. And in that, you talk about ego energy and soul energy and identifying the difference and kind of what's driving you in any particular moment. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. I could probably talk about that for days
I know.
because it's one of my biggest awakenings, I would say, or my biggest learnings about myself is I always worked from ego energy, but I didn't even know there was such a thing or, that I would hear monkey mind or things, but I really didn't resonate with all of that. But I would say that I had to, one of my guides, one of my, a therapist actually helped me really see that I needed to take mindfulness training. And I talk in detail of like how much I was kicking and screaming going to this mindfulness training. But the cliff notes are mindfulness training gave me the ability to have space between my thoughts, which I didn't even know that was possible. I thought my thoughts were part of who I was and I was acting upon my thoughts. So mindfulness training gave me the ability to kind of see a conveyor belt of thoughts
Mhm.
and see what repeat thoughts I had happening inside of me all the time. And what I realized is I was living a lot in the ego energy, and the ego energy is really there to protect us, but a lot of times it's an overdrive. And so it kind of gives you that worry, that anxiety, that, questioning, that fear. It's really just like acting as like, I need to protect you at every cost all the time.
Mhm.
And without mindfulness, I wouldn't have even known I had an alternative way of living. So I compartmentalize ego energy just like in a box, like everything that has to do with worry, fear, anxiety, self-doubt, anything that questions what I'm doing is really my ego energy because it's really here to protect me and it wants me to be sure that everything I do is perfectly organized and in the like safest way possible. Well, I believe as body and a spirit and a soul that when we open our eyes, we get like a teardrop from the universal energy or from whatever you call your higher being to be. Teardrop comes into your body, and that teardrop is protected by that ego energy at all costs. But really, the purposes of us being on this planet is to let up a little bit on the ego energy so that our soul, the light from above, can shine through. And that's that love and connectiveness and appreciation and gratitude and really just more fulfilling energy that's not really so fear-based. And so I've really had to learn over the years, coming from a very intense work environment that was really successful when I worked in that ego energy,
Mhm.
because it just kept driving and driving and driving me in fear of not being successful. That I had to really take some steps back in my own self development to kind of create space between those thoughts so I could let myself kind of breathe into the energy of love, light, gratitude, which took a lot of training on my part to really be able to step back and determine that there are alternative energies that I can tap into and that I want a balance of those energies as I move through life and not be so heavily in the masculine ego energy that brought a lot of success, but also brought some emptiness because I didn't have that balancing of the feminine and soul energy.
Yeah, I love that. That was beautiful. And I know it's really hard. And for those who might be listening who are in these big careers, they might be wondering, well, how do I integrate that type of soul energy and still be successful? Are people going to think I'm nuts? Are people, am I somehow going to sabotage myself by tapping into that? Like that all sounds really great. But how do I do that and still be in big career or whatever, maybe you're in a C-suite position or something like that. How do you access that soul energy when our culture is so driven by ego energy?
Mm. It's actually a beautiful thing. And I think you'll actually be more successful if you can figure out how to do it because you'll be the calm one at the table. You'll be the one setting the energy or tone or pace for the meetings. You'll be the one that people feel comforted by because you will be comfortable in your own skin. And I think for me, ego energy drove my life for about 40 years. And even though I was doing, being, driving, succeeding, all of the things that you get accolades and awards for in corporate, I was intense and I had a lot of anxiety and I was worrying about every step that I wasn't really taking care of myself and I wasn't working from a place of knowing. And I
Mhm.
think for many of us, we do what we do a lot of times because we have a fear associated with it, like fear of not paying my bills, fear of looking silly, not getting promoted, not getting the project done. And I feel like the work that I've done just over the last 8 years is getting to a place of knowing and alignment. So I
Mhm.
still leverage my ego energy to get things done all the time, but I do it from a place of a peace comes to mind, but also just knowing like that I'm in my flow and that I don't have to move through my life so tightly wound. And it's funny because the opportunities and conversations have leveled up since I've really done this shift because I come from more of a place of like a more of a place of wisdom.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And as we're sort of winding things up here, you're probably familiar with Kristen Neff's work and self-compassion. And she talks a lot about that too, that people think if they have self-compassion, that they're somehow less effective, um, or they're not going to be as successful. And fascinatingly, but not unsurprisingly, I'm sure to you and to me, and hopefully to the listeners, the scientific research that's out there is actually people who are more self-compassionate and more in that soul energy, to use your term, are actually more successful and more driven to look for other opportunities and be incredible leaders for themselves, for their organizations, for other people in their relationships. it just puts us in a different realm. And I so appreciate that you've called that out and that you are a living example of that. And so, what I want to get to is you talked about all the work that you're excited to do. I want to talk a little bit more about that as we wind things up. What are you most excited for in this next year?
Oh my goodness, there's so many things. Well, I have to say that getting this third book published was a challenge. I got 6 to 7 no's for this book. And then I was like, it must not, the universe must not want it because I am getting so many no's, as I mentioned earlier, because people didn't really know how to categorize it. But I needed another year to really percolate what I was going to talk about. And I finally decided that I was going to write the book because I kept getting questions and really kind of people coming to me asking me very specific questions that I was answering in the book. And I was like, well, that's my sign that I need to get this book published. And so through the process, I published the book. I actually started creating a publishing company for not only my books, but other people's books too. And so my goal is to help more wisdom like this get into the world because there isn't a perfect place for it to go in a lot of publishing companies. And I feel like this is the wisdom that many of us need to really create the impact that we decided to do before we came here. So that's very exciting. The other thing I'm working on is I talked a little bit about a global wellness center. I have been gifted, as I mentioned, a center that is bigger than I could have ever imagined, that has amazing and incredible energy. And it's because of the retreats I started back in 2016 for women in business. I got a nudge to start these retreats. And of course, my first response was, I'm never doing that. I've never been to a retreat. I don't know how to run a retreat. And just this fall, I ran my 14th retreat, and the universe has now gifted me this amazing facility on Lake Erie that I could never even imagine to host these retreats. And so I'm a true believer that you are pushed along if you lean into what is calling you. And so I'm just excited to hear, like, if anyone wants to reach out and tell me what they're leaning into and what's calling them. I just think this is why we're here. And I think so many of us play it safe or question ourselves, but the world needs more of us leaning into this wisdom. The world
Yeah.
is a little bit lopsided, and we really need to kind of balance out these energies, not only for ourselves, but for our children, our nieces, our nephews, and for really the well-being of the planet.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And I'm very excited. I feel like I'm going to have to come to Lake Erie. So how can people find you? You said people should reach out to you. So tell us how people can find you.
Well, of course, you can find me on LinkedIn under JJ DiGeronimo or any platforms. My links are below, so you can find all of that. But if you're looking for the book, I would definitely encourage you to put the number 74 because it's Seeking 74 Key Findings. So put Seeking 74 and maybe JJ, only because you might end up on a dating site without that.
Well, that could be fun too, but yeah.
That could be fun. So, check out the reviews on Amazon. None of them are paid for. It's just people reading the book. And I just feel like I'm really excited about this book because I feel like it's a book that has helped so many people really lean into something they already know has been calling them, but they just haven't had like the bridge to make it so.
Yes, and I can't say enough good things about this book. It's a very practical and yet spiritual approach that I think is very much needed in this world. And I've already used many of the techniques and questions that are available in this book, and really would encourage people to check it out and check out JJ's work because she's doing incredible things in this world and is a living example of tapping into courage and leaning into discomfort and really coming out the other side in a way that I know you didn't expect, but is really inspirational. So, thank you very much for being with us today on the Fully Mindful. And I can't wait to see what you do next.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah.